Can India be the next global electronics production hub? That is a question that our guest today is going to answer. And he thinks yes. Hi, Mark and Kevin. How are you guys doing today?
We're well, thanks, Megla.
Really well, thanks, Megla. How are you?
Super. I'm doing
How's life
well.
in
Lots
Delhi?
going on, and life in Delhi is good. It's getting a bit cooler here. Monsoon has started, so it's not as hot as it was in June. Peak summer has passed, so that's good. It's getting
Well, we'll
cold
be
for you guys, isn't it?
yeah. Well, we'll be joining you soon. I mean, the trip's coming up quick now, isn't it?
The trip is coming up quick, and we are really filling up seats really
Yeah.
fast. It's so exciting. But just a quick reminder to everyone, in case you have not got your tickets yet, there's still time to do so until September 15th or so. So indiasourcingtrip.com, that's the place to go. This is an 8-day sourcing, learning, and cultural guided tour to India. If you're sourcing products for e-commerce, Amazon, whether you're an importer, whether you're even a retailer selling products in your own shop, this is a trip for you. We'll be teaching you best practices of sourcing products from India, how to find and vet suppliers, negotiate with suppliers, place orders, manage payments, manage logistics, shipping, quality control. And we'll also be taking you to a trade show where you can meet with thousands of suppliers and see hundreds and thousands of very cool products. And we'll also be giving you a cultural tour of India. So we'll be doing a Bollywood night where you can dance to some Bollywood tunes. We'll take you to Taj Mahal. And we're also going to be giving you a lot of great food and alcoholic beverages on almost all days. That's my favorite part of it, even though I don't drink much. But I'm sure a lot of other people are going to enjoy that. I don't think I'm going to be drinking. Who's going to manage the trip then? There needs to be somebody to manage people, right, who are drinking.
No, we've got you, Megla. We've got you over
there. So, Kevin, what's your favorite part of the trip?
My favorite part of the trip would probably be going to the fair and going around, but talking to the people, seeing what products are there, catching up with suppliers that we've used because we know that they're going to be at the fair and we haven't seen them for so long. But the other thing, it would be like doing a trip to Moradad. I think that's going to be my sort of, on the favorite list. What about you, Mark?
Oh, I think all the food. All the nice Indian food and all the different cultures, because Megla's very good and she's been to the hotel, and we're not going to just live on Indian food. We're going to have Asian and Western and all sorts. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to not cooking and having a maid for a week or 2 weeks. It's a bit like a holiday.
But there's so much though, Megla. There's so many highlights of the trip that it's hard to sort of put it in a nutshell, to be honest, isn't it?
Yes.
You think back, like all the things that we did, and on the 2019, and it sort of sticks in your mind. There was a lot of magical moments, wasn't there? Like the Taj, going to the Taj and running around, and I mean, all the people in the Taj wanting that photo taken with you, and
that was so much fun.
Like movie stars. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm looking forward to? Because we didn't do it last time. Was going to a market where we can just buy junky souvenirs and things.
Yeah,
that'll be good.
Yeah, this time we've got some additional time for shopping and just relaxing a bit. So we've added a day to the trip this year. And I think my favorite part was, when people went to the fair, they saw all of the products, and so many people were surprised by the quality and the variety and the range of products. I think to me, that was, the best part. So being able to introduce everybody to those products that are made in India, high quality types of products. So that is something that I'm really excited about. Let's say hi to a couple of people. We've got Andy joining us, and Andy's coming with us to India. We've got Christine also coming to India. So excited, looking forward to it. Looking forward to the interesting and amazing trip. Yeah, Sanchit is from Devalia, and he's going to be there as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, don't forget to take a look at indiasourcingtrip.com and get your tickets now, and also book your flights. Most people who bought their trip tickets have already booked their flights, because otherwise airfare gets more expensive. Okay, so let's get started with our show today. Our guest is Renaud Anjoran from Sofeast, and I'm going to invite him on stage. Hello, Renaud. How are you?
Hi, Megla. How are you? Hi, Margaret, and hi, Kevin.
Hi,
Hi,
Renaud.
Renaud.
Nice to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, welcome to the MMK Show, Renaud. And so excited to have you here. You and I have known each other for, I think, over 10 years or so now.
I think
We
so.
first met in
I think so.
Shenzhen. Yeah, it's probably,
Correct.
probably
Yes.
10 years. So it's really nice. I've been following your blog and following your work over the years. So very interesting to see what you've been doing. And most recently, you've actually traveled to India. You've got a team in India as well to help people develop products and source electronics. So very interested to learn about your experiences in India and your thoughts on where sourcing from India stands today and where it is going to go tomorrow. So first of all, Renaud, just give us a background on yourself and what you do. I know you've been in China for, I think, over 15 years. You've been based in China now.
I've been in China and Hong Kong for 17 or 18 years. In mainland China itself, a bit more than 10 years. Yes, that's why we used to meet mostly in Shenzhen, but sometimes also in Hong Kong, right? So
Yes.
a little bit of an intro. Yeah, I'm one of the partners at Sofeast, and our companies has two activities. One is, let's say, supply chain management services, and my background is in product quality assurance and new product reliability. Okay, and the other activity is contract manufacturing, and we help develop and manufacture mostly electronic products. About 95% of the products have electronic parts, and that's also in South China. Most of the activity is in Shenzhen and Dongguan, basically South China, close to Hong Kong. And we have about 200 employees overall, and it's still mostly in China. But as you mentioned, yeah, we've been growing a small activity in India, and we're really doubling up on it this year. It's mostly for engineering design and a few project managers for working on component selection. So there you go. So most of my experience have been in China, and a lot of it has been in electronic products. But obviously, the activity also took me to a number of other countries in Asia. Yeah, I've been in India several times, and yeah, I was there in June, and that's when you connected and said, "Hey, let's talk about it. Let's talk about your experiences."
Yeah, exactly. I saw you posting about it on LinkedIn, and then I was so intrigued to find out about your experience. And so, when was the first time you visited India?
2008.
Okay.
Yeah, 2008. Went up to New Delhi, and there's a trade show there, and then I went down to Tamil Nadu to see a few factories, and it was quite different, let's say, nearly a different country from what it is today. When you look at manufacturing, like industrial parks, and how mature basically the manufacturing sector has become. It's really evolved quite a bit, and in my understanding, it really accelerated over the past 5 years, very sharply, because of all the government support for manufacturing, all the ways they help people start up manufacturing companies, the way they make some of the facilities relatively easy to use, and so on. I'm sure you've talked about that before, but there's been a sharp uptick over the past 5 years. Yes.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because we usually talk about home products and gift products and textiles, garments. That's mostly those are the product categories that India is really known for, and the bulk of the exports are, in those categories. But then electronics is an emerging industry, so to speak. And so, yeah, we're very interested to learn, your perspective. So first question is, do you think India will become a competitor to China, at least for some electronics items?
It is. And
Okay.
it's kind of shocking to people sometimes, but when you look at the data and you look at what's happening on the ground, it's been very clear over the past 2, 3, 4 years already. So if a manufacturing hub it means that it's a place where a lot of something gets made. Well, India is a manufacturing hub for electronics, for sure. There's been a lot of productions that used to be in China that moved to India, South India specifically, and that then get shipped to the US market. Okay, and since President Trump put his tariffs in place on a lot of made in China products, and I would say more generally since the general geopolitical situation got very tense and nobody knows where it's going between the US and China, well, a lot of big companies have moved production. So I really need to make a distinction here. Otherwise, people are going, okay, big companies, and I'm, when we look at electronics, the biggest ones, including Apple, they have moved production. And for them, it is, I would not say it's easy because there's always a lot of work, but it is relatively straightforward. And I will explain why. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, the company that goes to Shenzhen or to Ningbo, goes into a showroom and says, oh, okay, I like this one. You put my logo on it and I want it with that shade of orange. And here's the packaging. These people, they find it very, very hard to move anything because they are, they're using a Chinese product, redeveloping it somewhere else would maybe take a lot of time and budget and so on and so forth. It's a very, very different situation. Okay, so different perspectives, different situations is normal. So you're asking about, is there a lot of electronics made in? Definitely yes. And it's something that people can search easily. Actually, there's a professor Megla, I think you know him, Professor O'Connor. He's in Monash University now, but he was in Hong Kong for a long, long time. He did a bit of research on that. And so in India, you have pretty much all the big Taiwanese contract manufacturers. Okay, everybody heard of Foxconn, but you also have Wistron, Pegatron, and so on. You have some Chinese ones also, Luxshare, which is a big one, a big supplier to Apple in particular. You have Asus, you have etc. etc. You have Lenovo also, which is Chinese. You have TCL. And others, right? You have Flex, which is American, I believe, and most of them are in Chennai or Bangalore, so it's South China, right? And they still receive a lot of the components, and that's really a key to understand. So the assembly of electronics definitely is happening on a large scale in India today. There's no question about that. These companies have hired thousands upon thousands of workers to do assembly, testing, inspection, packaging, okay, of electronic products that are then shipped out mostly to the North American market, again, to edge against the China risk, let's say. And I think just this year, Apple has basically pushed these subcontractors that arrange for the assembly to double the amount of work made in India, right? So just to give you an idea of the scale of this, it's also very apparent. I would just give you that number. I don't want to make it very boring, but just two numbers. The export overall from India to the US. So first, USA now is the number one trading partner of India. Last year was China. And if you're the top 10 trading partners, India is positive only when selling to the USA in the bilateral cooperation. From China, they buy more than they sell, and from most of the others is the same. And the number is this. In 2021, they exported about $52 billion to the US. 2022, 76 billion. Okay, so this is a rise of 47% year over year of exports from India to the US. And I'm pretty sure, I don't have the details, but I'm pretty sure a good part of that, a significant part of that is electronic products, right? Because they tend to be very valuable. It's a lot of value. So it is a hub, to respond to your question, a hub of assembly of electronic products in South India mostly for export to North America of products under the brands of big companies, major multi-billion-dollar companies. That's where India is at this moment in the electronics industry.
Okay. Renaud, what are the main types of electronic products that you see India becoming the strongest in? I mean, obviously we're talking about phones, but are there other electronic products as well?
Well, phone is a big one because also they assemble pretty much every mobile phone sold in India today, right? If you go back 10 years or more, they were buying a lot of finished phones from China, but now there's been a change in policy, and a lot of these phones come in kit, okay, in kit in India, and then it's assembled in India and sold for sale in India. So there's also a lot of assembly for the local market. I forgot to mention that. Sorry. No, we're not just talking about iPhones and iPads. It's electrical home appliances. It's all kinds of connected devices, portable or not. It's a very wide range of products. It's computers, laptops, etc., etc. So basically, when you look at assembly, it's not that complicated for these big companies to set up assembly line and test labs and all the equipment that's needed, all the facilities that are needed for putting these components together and shipping them out. It doesn't make a big difference. But yeah, to answer your question, it's a very wide range of products, right? And I think where you're going to go in this discussion is, what about the smaller buyers, right? What about the smaller buyers that are trying to develop their own products, maybe? Okay, so as I mentioned, there's a case of the products that distribute an existing product. Okay, again, I go to a trade show, I go to the Canton Fair, or I go on Global Sources, and I pick some samples that are nice. I contact the suppliers and say, can you put my logo on it and ship it to me? This is still going to be in China for a long time. Okay, now there's the companies that develop their own products, and that is very, very different, because when you develop your own product, you can make a lot of choices, design choices, that make it easier to have it made outside of China, right? So what I mean by that is that when you pick the components, and that's the big question mark here, what components will go into the product? When you pick the components, you can decide to use components, let's say fewer components that are made in China. Most electronic products made in China that are not at the high end, pretty much all of the bill of material, all of the components are made in China. Okay, except when you go into very specific things, maybe there's something coming from Taiwan, something coming from Malaysia, etc. If you look at Apple products, there's a lot of different components coming from Japan, etc. But to make it simple, for small companies, usually the entire bill of material comes from China. Okay, when you want to have that made in India, the same kind of product, you're probably still going to have some components made in China, but you might also be able to hopefully find more that are made in India itself, plus maybe a few maybe made in Vietnam, Malaysia, and so on. So you don't rely excessively on China, right? And over time, so currently, if you take a snapshot today, it is still very hard to bypass China, to avoid sourcing electronic components from China. Or you're going to buy, made in Germany, made in USA, expensive components, and the price of the finished products is going to be, might be 2 times higher than something made in China. So in most cases, it doesn't really make much sense. So if you take a snapshot today, you can reduce the content of the product that comes from China, but you cannot completely bypass China. Okay. And over time, what really counts when you plan for your supply chain, you're setting up your supply chain somewhere, you start to develop products to be made somewhere, you want to look at the next 10 years, right? Because you invest a lot of time. You might invest in setting up maybe your own facility and so on. You want to look at the next 5 years, next 10 years. Now, if you look at the next 5 years, next 10 years, what I found, I talked to a number of people about that. I asked a lot of questions. There are a number of projects in India of investment to make some of these very common components in India. So there's some ICs and some chips, some semiconductors and so on, but let's put this aside. That's most of them are for the automotive market and so on. But if you look at most of the components that are most commonly on a printed circuit board, let's say the relatively simple ones, let's say relatively low tech, relatively inexpensive, these ones sooner or later will be also available in India. Okay. The big question is when you are trying to have one of the modules or one of the components that is relatively advanced. If you want that specific battery at the China price, well, it's going to be tough to get that same one at the China price in India. If you want that very advanced camera module, you're still going to have to buy it from China, maybe from Taiwan, right? So that very specific display, because display assembly is very, very technical and very advanced. If you want that very specific display, okay, you still have to get it maybe from China. But if you're open to making changes in your design, the more flexible you are, the easier it will be for you to localize the content, to buy more made in India components. Okay. But really, again, I want to emphasize having finished products assembled in India, made in India, is possible. Okay, is possible, and it would be easier and easier over time. That's really the big message. Because these big companies, I mentioned Apple and Amazon, HP, etc. They have a lot of production assembled in the facilities of Foxconn, Wistron, Pegatron, Flex, and so on. And over time, they're also pushing very hard to create the network of subcontractors that make more and more of these components, because they don't like to buy, everything from China. Number one, they rely too much on China. Number two, obviously, there's extra delays, extra cost, and everything to get it over there. Number three, there's a risk. When you import electronic components from China, most of them will get to Chennai, to the Chennai port, right? Because it's on the side. It mostly comes to Chennai, and the customs there are not necessarily the most cooperative and the faster, as fast as they can, to get these components coming from China to get out of customs. So the whole process is a bit cumbersome, right? So over time, this is really pushing them, and that's the purpose, right? Pushing them to localize a lot of the component fabrication. So looking ahead, the future, I think, is bright for electronics because of the presence, the availability of these components, these electronic components. This is what will make the whole difference. I think in 10 years, there will be much more production of these components in India than in Vietnam, for example. Because in Vietnam, it's very, very convenient to get the components from China. There's not much incentive to recreate the whole ecosystem. Now, they are working on it, of course, but the incentive is not as strong as in India. Also, India has a very large domestic market and is growing fast. So the incentive for the local market will also be larger and larger. As I mentioned, I don't want to repeat too much, but as I mentioned, there are government measures that force people to assemble a lot of these products in India, right, currently. So this is also pushing for the establishment of this supply chain in India, right? Sorry, I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It totally makes sense. And it's, it's very, very useful to know all of this and how, the whole industry is developing. Kevin?
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the benefits, Renaud, for of developing the electronic products with Indian suppliers, say, versus Chinese suppliers?
So right now, if you take 10 buyers that are trying to get out of China and that are looking at countries such as India, I think the number one benefit that they pay attention to will be the lower geopolitical risk, right? India is a neutral country. India doesn't want to be in alliances with such and such. The USA will always tend to be nice to India just to make sure that, there's not a second China somewhere in Asia that doesn't like them, right? So the geopolitical risk is much, much lower. That's really number one, and I would say by far, okay? For certain types of products that need a lot of manual work, there's a big difference in cost, obviously, because labor rates, wages in India are much lower than in China, in the manufacturing hubs in China. That is an advantage. Obviously, your audience knows about all the cool products that can be found in India. There's a lot of specialty items, a lot of arts and crafts, a lot of things in textile and so on that are rather unique, right? And there are some products that combine some of this together, maybe with some electronic functions, right? So it might make sense to get everything made in India in some cases. It's not that common, but remember, people tend to put electronics into everything now. So it's going to happen more and more, maybe.
Maybe you can have a wooden tray with a charger, right? Mango wood serving tray with a charger.
Oh yeah, wooden tray with sure sensors, so they when they get off the rails, I don't know, there's the brakes that could be all kinds of things, right? With the lights in front and something blinking. Of course, this is going to be. So some people are probably already doing that. So these, I guess, will be the top three. I don't want to, badmouth China because there's all kinds of Chinese suppliers and there's all kinds of Indian suppliers. Okay, so I don't want to generalize too much. But one thing that I really, really like in India is that I go to a manufacturing facility and 9 times out of 10, at least, the owner is an engineer. Okay, if it's the founder, now if it's from the father and so on, it might be a bit different. But in most cases, the owner is there on a day-to-day basis. Number one, he's involved in his operations. Okay, that's a big one. In China, not so common, not always the case. He's an engineer by background most of the time. He's technical. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. And of course, it depends, but they tend to be relatively open. Now, of course, they don't want to make it easy for you to get some key, critical information that could be given to competitors and everything. That's everywhere. But if you look at what they're doing and you ask questions, why are you doing this, and so on, and they like to engage in a conversation and you can understand why they're doing the way they're doing. And also, another thing that I really like is that some of them, and of course, it's more. If you look at automotive suppliers, it's much more common, but it's trickling down a little bit. They are much more focused on continuous improvement of their operations, and whereas in China, and it's not just in China, but in a lot of places, they have the operations going, and it's a matter of, okay, we need more capacity, we hire more people. We need to go faster, okay, like put a all-nighter, we don't care. They will sleep the day after. We need to put to ship that container, etc., etc. And it's always sort of last minute trying to think of ways to throw more bodies at it, and or maybe to cut corners and so on. But it's not so common in China to find a manufacturer that is really trying to improve and to learn from best practices from the best companies, and to really mold their company culture around it, and to have like management practices that come back and that really address the issues as they come up and follow up and so on, is not so common, except in the very big companies. But in India, it is more common. They are more looking at the best practices. They are more aware of what happens outside of their four walls, let's say. They're much more interested in learning, I would say, right? I would say it's nearly to their detriment, because they're maybe less focused on marketing and sales and much more focused on getting their operations nicely fine-tuned and always making it more efficient and so on, right? So maybe it's not really helping them be very present on all the B2B directories and on trade shows and to be top of mind in the buyer's minds. Okay, but that's really something I found very, very nice, very refreshing.
Right. And in terms of quality, product quality, what are some of the things that overseas buyers need to be aware of? And, how does the overall quality compare with electronics products that are made in China?
I would say if you've been buying from China and you have some a process to follow to assure quality, take that same process to India, learn from there, and adapt. But don't forget everything you have learned over the years, right? So India is such a huge country, right? It's a huge country, and there's so many suppliers, and there's new manufacturing facilities popping up probably every day. Obviously, quality levels are from best to worst. I've seen some of the best for sure. I've also seen some workshops that are not that great. I visited 4 or 5 factories that make mechanical components for the automotive industry, and yeah, they are 100 part per million defective, which means it's way below 1% of defective products in their parts, right? So you can find some really good components, at least if your volumes make it interesting to these manufacturers. Again, low volumes, small volumes, very, very different story. Even more in India today than in China, I would say. But if you look at electronics, I would be less worried about the little, I cut the corners, so the buyer needs to monitor the supplier all the time, and it's like a cat and mouse game, right? This is let's say there's some Chinese suppliers where it happens, okay, and it's very frustrating for the buyer, and it's very difficult to have a conversation with the supplier, a constructive conversation in these cases. In India, I would be less worried about that, but I would still, at the beginning, keep, the right validation process, get the new product into production, inspect quality and so on, and then over time relax as they show me that they're doing a good job. I would still do that the same way in China or in India.
And look,
That makes
does India have the capability to scale to compete with China, do you think?
So, yeah, that's a question that comes back from time to time, and people are thinking, well, China is going to go down, and then there's going to be another one that's going to just replace China. Not going to happen. Let's not count on that, right? Now, does India have the capacity to scale? If there's one country that has the capacity to scale, it is India. Okay, to take up a lot of the work from China. Definitely because of the demographic, right? It's I read that according to official figures, India is going to have more people than China starting next year, I think, or this year. Anyway, it doesn't matter that much, I would say. Does India have the capacity to scale? It is scaling right now. If you look at the manufacturing output, it is growing fast. And there's no reason why, in the next 20, 25 years, if they keep the same government policies, why you would not keep rising like this, right? So that would be my answer. The biggest unknown is probably the government policies, because right now it is favorable to the manufacturing sector, while before it was maybe more favorable to the farming sector and so on and so forth. But there's a point where it is at a tipping point in electronics where really the output of electronics out of India is going to keep growing fast over the next 4 or 5 years for sure. It's hard to see what would slow that down, just because all these the Foxcons and the Pigatrons and so on, most of them they're hiring as fast as they can. They had a lot of trouble, actually. I think it's Foxconn or Wistron, I forget.
And Renaud, do you think that India can compete on prices in the electronics area?
Again, at volume, yes. At volume, yes. In small volumes, I would expect a made in India product to be maybe 5, 10, maybe 15% more expensive. That's from what we've seen, because a lot of these components have to be imported. The components that are made in the country might be, slightly more expensive. Again, 5 to 10% is not surprising at all, except if there's a lot of manual work, because, as I mentioned, wages are much lower. So you might make a difference there.
Right. And so in terms of the regions that are developing, or where electronics production is developing mostly, it's mostly in the south, right? So Chennai, Bangalore, those are the cities that. So what are the cities that you visited, and what products, what types of companies were there, and what products were they making?
Right. So yes, it's for electronics, it is South India, clearly, right? This time, when I went last month, I went to Chennai. So they have an area called Ambattur, just a little bit west of it's part of the city. It's a district of the city. I went to see some facilities making plastic injection molded parts, making foam, making, let me see, some of them were doing some soldering and things, and welding, I should say, on big agricultural equipment. But this time I spent more time in a city called Hubli Dharwad. It's basically between Bangalore and Goa. It's not very far from Bangalore. And there I visited, they have 2 new industrial parks there. I looked at factories doing die casting, doing forging, doing plastic injection molding, doing, let me see, I'm forgetting, some metal sheet processing, and I'm forgetting a few. I made some videos of
Which
them actually.
industries were these targeted at?
Basically looking at the components that are available there, comparing that to what we see in China, and having an idea of what's possible. Because a lot of the time when one of our clients come to us and say, okay, I'm trying to design this new product, okay, very, very fast, one of the first steps is to do a feasibility study on what components are needed and what is most important, how to pick the right supplier for these components. So it's extremely important for us to have a knowledge of where to find what kind of components. If it's low volume, it's going to have to be a different supplier from high volume. If it's high quality and maybe high flexibility, it's going to have to be different from the workshop that likes to do always the same thing in a simple way and doesn't pay much attention to quality, but might be more price competitive, and so on and so forth, right? I looked also at a nice factory making a lot of tooling fabrication, because that's something. Most electronic products have an enclosure, right? And that enclosure usually is in plastic, and people like to have their own custom design for the enclosure because that's really the look, the aesthetics of their product. So in most cases, 90% of the cases or more, the tooling has to be fabricated so that this enclosure can be made in mass production. And China, especially South China, has a lot of tool makers. They are fast, they are cheap, they're much cheaper than anywhere else in the world. And there's a lot of them, so there's a lot of options, right? And one of the key questions we had was, what about the molds? Can we find a nice tooling manufacturer over there? We found one. They're nice. They're very knowledgeable. They do a lot of things, including even retrofitting and what's the word? Anyway, taking an old mold and making it so it's as good as new, nearly, right? They have a lot of competencies. They are definitely slower than in China, because one of the key things to understand is that Chinese suppliers have had a lot of subsidies for years now, especially since 2015. It's been a strong push from the government. Give them a lot of subsidies so they automate. They buy higher tech equipment, right? So when you go to Chinese factories, you will tend to see more higher tech machinery, more CNC machines, more et cetera, et cetera. When you go to an India manufacturer of the same type of component, you will tend to see more manual labor. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more expensive, because again, wages are lower. So also there's a lower incentive in India to automate, but it does mean that it's slower. So to get an enclosure in plastic made and validated in China, including the runs and checking and doing a second run and everything, roughly is 6 weeks, except if it's particularly complex. In India, it's easily 50% longer. And that is one of the things that we're still trying to wrap our head around, okay, we can get the tooling made in China, sent to India, but then we need to validate it very, very carefully, because otherwise we have to send it back from India to China, make some adjustments, send it back to India. That's expensive, and that takes some time. That's a big problem. So it's always a trade-off, right? Smaller companies like mine need to be careful and have a lot of thinking to do. But again, if you're Apple and you tell Foxconn, hey, you have to do this that way and that way, Foxconn will do all of this internally if necessary, right? So as they do in Shenzhen, right? So much bigger volumes, much higher volumes make life much easier.
Yeah, so Renaud, how do you see the electronic supply chain developing in India? How's that coming on?
Right. So as I mentioned before, yeah, the finding the right components, electronic components in the country is a challenge, right? I've heard of all kinds of things. I've asked a number of people. Some people say, oh, there's a lot of things can be bought in the country, but then you look at it and then you say, wait a minute. You buy it from Chennai, but actually it's imported from China. That's why it's on stock in Chennai, right? So most of the electronic components, right, that go into the finished electronic products that are assembled in India still come from out of India. So it's not just China. Very often the cheapest ones are in China, and there's a very wide range of electronic components made in China. So China is still the big one. Some of them might come from Malaysia, Taiwan, and other places like that. What we see is that there are specialized electronic component manufacturers already there. You can see them in the industrial parks and so on. They are there, okay, but they only respond to maybe 10%, 20% of the demand. Again, if you can design your product in a way that uses these components, and if you don't necessarily need the most advanced type of camera, display, and so on, you can buy more locally. But on average, it's still very low. And if you look at the next 5 years, next 10 years, there are investments, there are new companies getting set up. There are going to be more and more of these components made locally in India. And that's the key. If you look at India right now, for electronics made in low or relative or medium volume, let's say, it's not great. China is so much more convenient and a little bit cheaper. But if you look in the next 5 years, 10 years, I think the picture will be different, because there's a lot of forces pushing for the formation of these component manufacturing units in India. So it is happening under our eyes.
Mm. So what advice would you give to companies looking to develop electronics in India, in sort of new regions?
If you really want to have your product, your electronic device assembled in India, made in India, you need to start from the design phase, when the designers pick the components to put together in the prototype, right? Because if they start to do it in an easy way with Chinese parts, then it's going to be much harder later to change that. Okay, it's basically a redesign. So you need to start that from the design of the new product, and that's why it's so hard sometimes to transfer existing productions that are happening in China and move them over to India. Very often it's planned for the next version. So the good thing, or the crazy thing, if you ask me, in electronics is that very often you have a new version, right? You have a new iPhone every year, a new iPad model, a new, etc., for consumer goods anyway, in consumer electronics. So in this case, when they're planning for the new version, the next version, or maybe the version after that, they do the hard work of saying, okay, what can we find in India that doesn't have to be bought in China, etc. You also need to think of the assembly of these components. So there are some very good PCBA houses in India. So you have the boards, right, on which you put the components, the printed circuit boards, and then you have to assemble the components on them. So the boards, it doesn't really matter, it can come from China, but most of the value of the product sometimes is on the components that go on the board, and then it has to be assembled together, right? There are some very good manufacturing facilities doing SMT, basically placing the components on the boards. That's not the problem, but you need to think of the final assembly of the product also. In some cases, in China, you can automate a lot of things again. You can automate soldering, for example, of all these components and the battery and the wires and everything together. You can automate this. If it's automated and done well, it will make for a much more reliable product. If you do it manually, it might be a problem for your product. because maybe if the soldering is not done very well and there's a shock, such as the device drops on the floor, the product might stop working. Is this a problem for you or not? Is this a big problem or not, right? So some products will be a good fit. Some other products might have to wait maybe for another few years. So it's really a matter of looking at the manufacturers in India and what they can do, what processes they have in-house for the PCB assembly and the final assembly. This is very, very important. Also, electronic products need to be tested and retested for performance and reliability and durability and for compliance and so on and so forth. When it comes to compliance, you have all the major labs, the SGS, Bureau Veritas, TUV, and so on. They're all there in India. Not really a problem, except if it's very, very specific, but then the samples can be sent to another country. When it comes to advanced reliability and durability testing, India might be a little bit short. It might be difficult to find a lab that can do that. Now, again, the very big companies, they have that in-house. No problem. They buy all the equipment. They do it in-house. But if you're a small company on your own and you need to find a service provider in India to do that, it might be a bit difficult. So you might want to start with products that are not, let's say, not the most complicated products, right, at the moment, right? And be a little bit flexible in your design. Then there are ways to do it. Again, feasibility study need to be done. It's not that difficult. Now, in 10 years, I'm sure the ecosystem will be much more developed, including for small and medium-sized companies.
Okay, but just a quick question here. If say all the components are coming from China and Taiwan and everywhere, and it's just simply being constructed in India, where does made in India with other components from China, like sometimes here we get like vegetables and they're like packed in Australia from New Zealand, whatever. Will that become like on a phone? Will it be made in India from China components, or will it always just be made in India if it's made there?
No, there's only one country of origin that needs to be shown on the label, if that's your question.
Yeah.
If let's say 80% of the electronic components, and maybe in value, maybe it's 95%, because the more expensive ones will tend to be the more advanced ones, maybe still coming from China or Taiwan or somewhere. If most of the electronic components are from let's say from China, you still have maybe the enclosure itself, some of the mechanical parts and so on. These ones usually can be sourced in India much more easily, right? It's going to be much easier. So what you look at is what is the content of work that comes from India versus other countries. And then if you really want to make sure that your product can be labeled as made in India, you need to look at the rules of the customs, right? So in the US, the Customs and Border Protection, they have their own logic. And basically, if you just have a kit coming from China to India, and you just have someone manually and with a screwdriver put things together and ship it out, it will not qualify as made in India. However, is this really your interest? I don't think so. You want to have some of the mechanical parts done in India. You want to have, and usually for electronics, there's a lot more than just someone with a screwdriver putting things together. But you need to be aware of that. You need to know what's really going to happen in India versus, just to avoid this idea of the kit coming and being put together, or maybe just a finished product just repackaged. Some people play games like that. It's extremely dangerous for the importer because it's not legal. It's not legal if you label something as made in India for that. Now, it's not happening much in India, but it is happening in some other countries in Southeast Asia. Some people are playing games and really playing with fire. It's very dangerous.
So we might have kettles made in India soon instead of kettles made in China.
Right. Yeah, kettles. Yeah, most kettles will still be made in China, I'm sure, in
Still
5
be
or
made
10
in
years.
China.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Everyone watching, if you have any questions for Renaud, type them in the comments. Good morning, Gail. It's
Good
early
morning,
morning
Gail.
for
There we
you.
go.
But everyone watching, if you have any questions for Renaud, you can type them in the comments. We'll take the questions now. And also, Renaud, so as of now, what types of companies should look at getting their contract manufacturing done in India, in terms of especially scale of companies? Of course, it looks like it doesn't make sense for really small companies to go in and do, contract manufacturing if they have their sourcing, I don't know, maybe just a couple of containers a year or something like that. It's probably not feasible. But
So
as of now, it looks like from what you're saying, it's better for larger companies to do that sort of investment, right?
well, I would say the number one criterion is how exposed are you to the China risk, geopolitical
Okay.
risk. If your main market is the USA, if you are very, very exposed to China, you need to look at other options. Now, if your volumes are very low, but if you develop your own product, you have a chance. Okay, I think that's really one key criterion here. If you just distribute a product that was already developed by your manufacturer and you don't own the product, you don't have the design files, you don't have anything, it's going to be very, very difficult. You need to be ready to really invest in developing your own product. In that case, it is possible. Now, if the volumes are going to be very, very low, I would say it's difficult everywhere. Right, even in China. But if you're going to make 5,000 pieces, 10,000 pieces per batch, it's probably doable. The question is, the two questions are, how much can you buy locally in India, looking at the bill of material, and what is the impact on the total price of the product? Because China is so competitive. There's so many players, especially in Shenzhen, Dongguan, Huizhou, in the electronics industry. If you know how to look for the right component from the right suppliers, you will get the best price. There's no country that will beat it, basically, right? So if the China risk pushes you out of China, you need to be aware that some of the components, it's going to be, again, 5 to 10% higher on the component level. Is not unheard of at all. I would say it's typical.
Right. That totally makes sense. So, let's start wrapping up here. If anybody has any questions, type them in the comments. Renaud can take questions as well. And so, Renaud, apart from India, are there any other countries that you're seeing where electronics production is developing? Vietnam is also
Obviously,
a production hub.
Obviously, Vietnam, they're very full. I would say it's very hard to go there and get a good supplier to be interested in your production if your volumes are low now, because they're very, very, very busy. That's one of the challenges with Vietnam is the size of one Chinese province. It's already full. You can't send more work there, or only very gradually as they automate. But that's it. Some work went back to Taiwan. Some work went to Malaysia. These would be the main candidates for electronic productions. There's a lot of talk about Mexico, but we haven't seen much going back to Mexico for the US market. And the customs data that came out, I don't know, 1 or 2 months ago, show that they're not gaining much manufacturing work. It's journalists talk a lot about it, but they haven't got a lot of new projects coming from China.
Right, that makes sense.
And
But
so,
Renaud, this has been. Good.
Yeah, it's been really good. Sorry, Magla, I just want to ask Renaud one more thing. And Renaud, do you really think, like, down the south of India, and it's a new area, would you recommend anybody at this stage going to have a look to if they were serious buyers? Is there anything in place?
Make sure you get your appointments before, and probably they should also talk to you and your team with your India sourcing trip, right?
Right.
Don't go there. It's not China. In China, you can fly there and get some people literally walk into factories and say, "Hey, can I see a salesperson?" And the white guy or white lady. Oh yeah, salesperson. In India, it's not like that. They will not open the door. They will not open the door. It's quite. It's a different thing.
Different culture.
So you definitely need to do your homework and get some appointments and so on there before you go.
Yeah.
So what is the one thing that's really surprised you about working in India?
Just how to say, I'm used to working in China where there's always they all have their own dialects. Even if you speak Chinese, it's it's often a bit difficult to pick up what they're saying and so on. But in India now, especially in Tamil Nadu, English is very common. If you go to Karnataka, just around Bangalore, a little bit less, right? Because they tend to speak more Hindi as a second language, from what I understand. But still, people in business will speak relatively good English. Once you get used to the accent, it's
I was going to ask you that.
You need a few days every time to readjust to that, I would say.
Yeah. And they talk very fast, usually.
Yes, depending on the people. Sometimes they speak fast and with strong accent. Ooh.
Yeah.
On the factory floor, where there's machinery making noise, you're like,
yes. I could imagine.
Yeah. And the accents are different in different regions. So northern India has a completely different accent, and in southern is totally different.
Right. That's why you need to go there for a few days and get used to it.
Yeah, that's why you need to come an India sourcing trip.
Yes.
Get tuned in, folks.
Yep. It's 77 days till we go.
77 sleeps, Mark, as you say?
77 sleeps, yes, 77 sleeps.
Yeah, I would add, for people who are used to working with, maybe in China or maybe not used at all, India is a different place, and going there with a trip like yours is great, just to get your head around it and understand, the geography and the different parts of the country, different cultures, really, and so on. And you have a much better understanding after going there, because desk research doesn't really cut it. Yeah, you have to go.
No, it doesn't. And I think for people who have not really, and for some people who haven't really traveled to developing countries, it is a culture shock as well. And so that's something that we help people who are coming on our trip, we help them prepare for what to expect. Like, as soon as you come out of the airport, there'll be a lot of people, like too much crowd and chaotic, and even the traffic is really crazy. There's lots of beeping and everything. So it can get very overwhelming if you're not ready and if you don't know what to expect over there. And if you don't have a group, sometimes when you go out of the airport, there are people pulling you in all directions. They're like, "Oh, come take a taxi with me, and I'll give you an auto," and things like that. I mean, it's little stuff, but then when you're on a business trip, you want everything to be very smooth and the logistics sort of taken care of, so you can focus on your business and you're not worrying about, should I take this taxi or should I take a bus or should I take a train or how do I get to my hotel? So those are the things that we really take care of at the trip, so that people can really focus on sourcing and finding new products.
Yeah, there's real value in it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and hope you can join us as well, Renaud. I mean, you've traveled to the south, and our trip is in the north, so a slightly different region. So it would be great if you could join us for a few days as well. I think that'd be
Right.
Absolutely.
that'd be
Yeah.
super cool.
You're very
Put
welcome.
on your
Renaud.
dancing shoes and
Yeah, do the
show us what
Bollywood
your
night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm a bit limited in my travels because of the quarantine every time I go back, because there's also a great thing about India is that for them COVID is a little bit behind them, but
Yeah.
when you go to China, it's definitely still very, very present.
Yeah, right.
That's a
Yeah,
problem.
That's
yeah.
a
Over
shame.
here, everything is sort of back to normal. It doesn't feel like there's any. I mean, some people are still wearing masks, and when you go into certain like malls and crowded places, you do need to wear masks. But otherwise, things are pretty much back to normal. So it feels very normal. In fact, even coming into the country, there are no restrictions as such. You still have to
If you're
show your
vaccinated.
vaccinations, your vaccination certificate or a negative COVID test. Done a few hours before you travel, but otherwise there are no restrictions coming in, and then more flights are opening up as well to India, so that's a good thing. Well,
But I
Renaud,
think-
thank you
I think
so much
you-
for your
you gotta
time
be-
today.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Kevin.
Megla,
That's
we got a
great.
bit of a lag. We had a bit of a lag there, didn't we?
Yeah,
I was just going to say.
you don't want me to end today, Kevin.
And I was just going to say that, be smart. And if you're going into an area where there's a lot of people, just wear your mask.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
do.
Sure.
We go, in sort of public places where there's a lot of people. And it, surely, like in India and Delhi where Megla is, I mean, there's not many places you can go where you stand in the next corner by yourself, is there?
Yeah, there's people everywhere.
Nobody
Nobody
on
looks at
person
you.
walking by.
Right. You can wear your mask. There's no problem. Nobody looking at you in a weird way
No.
and so on. If you go to
Yeah.
places
So
where
It's
it's very
accepted
dusty,
now.
and so-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Sorry, Megla, go on.
Anything else, Kevin, before I sign off?
No, I'm finished.
Cool. Well, then, thank you so much, Renaud, for your time. And it was really
Thank you.
enlightening, even for us. Like, we work with India and we work with Indian suppliers. We talk to suppliers every day, but we really don't, talk about the electronics side of things. So it was very enlightening for us as well. And great
Great.
advice. Just stay away from save away from electrical. Cool. All right. Thank you so much,
Right.
Renaud. And
Thank you
we
so
will
much.
see you somewhere in the world someday.
Thank you, Renaud.
Thanks,
All the
Renaud.
best.
All right. Take care.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.